Hi, this is Dr. Robert Weaver. I'm the director and neuropsychologist at the Weaver Center. And I've really had a lot of great feedback from so many different places across the world about some of the videos we've been doing here. So today, and as I've always said, please email us or let us know at our website at www.weavercenter.org about any topics, any thoughts, any questions you might have. Love to be answering the questions. And for today's conversation, someone said, well, how does attention deficit and executive function or organizational difficulties impact adults? And what's the relationship between these kinds of developmental or neurological vulnerabilities interact with emotions? So I thought I would mention a 56-year-old fellow who I just started seeing 2 weeks ago. And he came in saying that he didn't even want to let his wife know. He has a wife and two adult grown female children. He didn't want to really tell anybody about coming in because he had gone to so many therapists and they just did not seem to be helpful, especially because of the expectations that his wife had. And, he mentioned a whole bunch of things that she often says to him, like, it's so hard to have another child at home, and why don't you ever get here on time, and, why don't you do these things that I've been asked for all the time? How about just doing this one time, just so I don't have to, can you write it down, or can you just, there was just an ongoing just landslide of critical comments that he was not only getting from his wife, but at work and at with his kids and friends sometimes. And so one of the things that we started talking about right away is the understanding of how, he also mentioned that he's been very depressed for a long time and has anxiety every time he gets up because he knows he's going to screw up some way or another, and it's been a long time, right? So one of the things that we just started on right away, because he said that he just, he never gets to any place on time. It's hard for him to start anything, anything that's on a list or whatever. And he says that lists just don't work for me. I just pile up on lists and everybody thinks that's going to be the way to help me, and it just never has, never does. And I almost never finish a project. So those are the biggest complaints. He had several that we talked about originally, but those are the ones I want to focus on today. So one of the first pieces of conversation that I had with him was, this is how executive function works. When we have trouble with organization and getting started, which of course everybody talks about as procrastination, I don't really believe in that term. In fact, I don't believe in that term if you have executive function problems. But what I said to him is that one of the ways in which everybody gets to things that they have to do that they may not be that interested in is because they feel the consequences of not getting to things and not starting in enough time. They might be worried about the consequences, embarrassed about the consequences, afraid of the consequences. So everybody starts those kinds of tasks way up earlier, by days or weeks or whenever, right? Because they're getting rid of the apprehension, the anxiety, the negative feelings. We don't generally have that chip. We really don't. We know the consequences. If anybody asks us, so what's going to happen if you don't get this done? We know that as fast as anybody. But we don't feel the consequences, right? So we don't have the chip that really helps us get started on things and initiate things and complete things to get rid of those anxieties and apprehensions. So first of all, I said, that's really amazing because I never intend to do any of these things. I just find myself in trouble all the time. But it looks very intentional to others, because if they were waiting as long as I would, it would have to be intentional. They just wouldn't do that. So it's hard for other people to understand what's going on in our mind when we know so well what the consequences are, but we don't move. And so I said that because of that, all the people that say, just get moving, just do it, just, blah, 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 that doesn't make a lot of sense to us. And we often find ourselves saying, listen, we got plenty of time, or I'll get to it, or, that's something that I promise you I will get to, and then it often doesn't happen. So this made a great deal of sense to him because he's never been able to really understand or explain both of those things. Why it's so hard for him to get started when his wife is very productive. She starts things. The kids are amazing like that, and they actually really do feel the consequences very acutely, and that's why they're on his case all the time, because they're feeling the consequences of his not getting started. So they're on his case all the time when he's not feeling the anxieties and apprehensions that they feel. So it's a very misunderstood behaviors. And it's the same is true with completing things. So we started there with some real education. And he already said, it just sounds so much more like what the struggles I'm having, because there's no intentional aspect to this, but I certainly find myself in trouble all the time, and I'm not getting anywhere on time. So he talked about how depressing this was, how much anxiety there is. He's aware of how much he's not doing well. He doesn't really know the reasons why, even though he has had some testing. I mean, we're likely to do a lot more neuropsychological testing because we assess strength so carefully, and our models are compensatory models. How do you compensate? How do you develop strengths? How do you develop skills to cope with these difficulties? Because you need skills that work in the moment and are not based on consequences to change these behaviors around, and therefore not feel so anxious, and therefore not feel so depressed, and feel like you are actually taking control over something that you really never had a way to take control over. So this was one of the beginning statements. We talked a lot about how attention and organization and so on and so forth. But one of the things that he said that he wanted to start on right away was just being able to get to work on time. And we use that because that's something that's a problem for him as a model to use how to get to any place on time. Right? So I said to him something that a very good professional here told me to do many, many years ago, is just write down the estimate of time that it's going to take to do anything. And then write down the actual time. And of course, for a long while, I forgot to even do that. So I needed sticky pads and reminders and use my watch and so forth. But I started to realize that whether it's going someplace or doing a project or reading something or whatever I was doing, I would always underestimate the time that it would take to get started on something, like to get outside the door. I was always thinking, well, how long is it going to take me to drive there? And maybe take a couple of few minutes to get ready and go out. But what I never was aware of and never paid attention to was the amount of time that it took to get ready to go. Now, again, that's an obvious thing for most people, but not for us. And so one of the things that I realized that no matter what project I was working on, that it was really quite consistent that I needed about 50% more time in my estimates. Okay, so now and then, back then, I would guess an amount of time, and I would add 50% to it and say that's the time that I need to leave or start to leave to move the next time. And then that wasn't based on consequences, because consequences really, I didn't have those anxieties. So I started having some strategies that were based on fact, and this is what I asked him to do on his first homework time after our initial meeting. And I also talked about, because he brought it up right away, is to do things now. As soon as we say we'll do them in a minute, it almost never happens. We intend to, but it doesn't happen. So I say to myself, 50 times a day or 30 or whatever, do it now. This morning, there was a little bit of some paper in the garage when I was just getting into the car, and it had been there yesterday, and I was getting in the car again. I said, do it now. Pick it up now. Okay? So this starts allowing us to be under much better control, feel a lot better, more confident, and so forth. So when he came in, he said, that really made sense. I went to visit the gravestones of my parents, and there was a problem with the placement of the stones because some of the the tractors that they had there had run over some things. And he said, okay, well, I'll give him a call later on. And then he thought, no, I'm going to do this now. So he went to the cemetery place, talked to the people. They were wonderful. They said they'd take care of it right away. And I said, so how was that? He said, it's pretty amazing that's not something that would ever be on a list again because I took care of it at the time. So you could see that even within the course of a week, we start making some really good progress on what to do to begin to alleviate his anxieties, apprehensions, depression, and so forth. So I hope you find these. I'm going to start doing a lot more vignettes because I hope they're instructive. I hope they're helpful. And I just love to have more and more people know what we do so they can apply some of these strengths themselves. All right. Bye-bye. Thanks.